Welcome to the 441st episode of Shakesyear. We are still working on Henry VI Part 1, and today we get to hear from Warwick in Act 2, Scene 4, which yesterday we were just in Act 2, Scene 2. And let's do a little bit of catch-up, because today's monologue comes from the very end of Act 2, Scene 4, so we've got a couple scenes that we need to cover. So at the end of yesterday's scene, a messenger came in and invited Talbot to go visit the Countess of Auvergne. I don't like French. Just the pronunciation of the language. There's so many letters and you don't pronounce most of them. And he's like, okay, I'll go see the Countess of Auvergne. Hey, you got me? And the captain's like, gotcha. So they head off. And Act 2, Scene 3 takes place in her quarters, wherever, when she's like, I have Talbot coming to see me and I'll arrest him and then I'll be famous for having captured Talbot. So Talbot comes in and she's like, oh, you silly little dwarf man. And he's like, bye. And she's like, wait, no, hang on, come here. And he comes back and he's like, yeah. And she's like, I have captured you. And he's like, no, you haven't. And she's like, yeah, because you're right there. And he's like, no, I'm not. She's like, yeah, you are. And he's like, you think that you have Talbot? Let me show you what Talbot actually is. And he sort of goes, ta-da! And the rest of his army shows up. And he's like, the name Talbot encompasses all this, not just this. So if you want to capture this, that's still not going to win the war, because there's all this still they're fighting. And she's like, oh. And he's like, and actually my guys are hungry. Can we have some dinner? And she's like, yeah, okay. And then we get to Act 2, Scene 4. I don't know why, but I love that scene. It's just funny to me. Anyway, so now we're in Act 2, Scene 4, which takes place in a garden in England, where we've got Richard Plantagenet, who is a Yorkist. He is the son of the Earl of Cambridge, who was put to death in Henry V for plotting to kill Henry V, which obviously he didn't do, but he was put to death for plotting it, which means Richard Plantagenet, this Yorkist, he no longer has like names or titles or any sort of claim to anything like that, which is the crux of the argument of Somerset, the Earl of Somerset, who is also descendant from a royal line, and he thinks that since he's like from the Lancasterian side, he's a Lancaster, not the sort that always pays their debts, but he's a Lancaster, and he's like, well, you, Richard, don't have a claim on anything anymore, so I should have a claim on things. And the two of them are butting heads and fighting whatever, and Richard Plantagenet plucks a white rose and he's like, I'm gonna take this as my sign, and Somerset grabs a red rose and he's like, this is mine. And then people start picking roses all over the place, and they pick white roses if they're going to be on Richard's side, and they pick red roses if they're going to be on Somerset's side. And there's a lot of trash talk of like, oh, don't prick yourself on the thorns because that'll make your white rose turn red, and blah, 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 blah. And they're like, okay, whoever has the most people pick a rose of their color just wins, and then we can just call it a day. And both guys are like, sure, yeah, whatever, until Somerset sees that Plantagenet has a lot more roses, and then he's like, yeah, no, I'm not backing down from this. Like, you don't have a claim to anything. And he decides that they're just gonna be fighty for a while, and thus begins the Wars of the Roses. Lovely, right? So he leaves and he vows that this isn't over yet, and that leaves Richard Plantagenet and Warwick and a lawyer and a couple other dudes just sort of hanging out. And Richard's like, what the? And Warwick is like, this blot that they object against your house shall be whipped out in the next Parliament, called for the truce of Winchester and Gloucester. And if thou be not then crowned your... Let me start that bit over again. And Warwick says, this blot that they object against your house shall be whipped out in the next Parliament, called for the truce of Winchester and Gloucester. And if thou be not then created York, I will not live to be accounted Warwick. Meantime, in signal of my love to thee against proud Somerset and William Poole, I will upon thy party wear this rose. And I hear prophecy this brawl today, grown to this faction in the Temple Garden, shall send between the red rose and the white 1,000 souls to death and deadly night. And thus begins the Wars of the Roses and starts this lovely fight. But Richard now has it in his head that he needs to get himself reinstated as the Duke of York, and he needs to figure out if his dad, the Earl of Cambridge, who King Henry V had killed, was actually killed lawfully, or if that was a big mess of things. And we get to learn more about that because some old characters from old plays come back very shortly, like tomorrow. Tomorrow we get to hear from Mortimer, and we'll find out if Richard's claim is legit. Anyway, I'll see you tomorrow for that.